Anything since?
No, that's right after
Okay.
we are.
No, he wasn't to the card today. No, he wasn't here. Back in his phone.
But I remember him saying that right after Zoomcast.
So tonight's Tzeh Ulmad is given by Yehuda Zarchi. So I'm going to introduce first. Rabbi Zarchi is the director of the Armour Heights Jewish Center, which is located in the former Toronto Cheder building, former Teves Yaakov, right? Former bank, it was RBC Bank. It was
Canada Trust.
Canada Trust Bank. Royal Trust, remember, right. And now it's given over to Real Trust.
You don't remember when it was Royal Trust? I didn't know.
And tonight's shir is also is sponsored, first of all, by Yaakov Samsonovich, Lilu Nishmas's grandparents, Rezel Bas Shloima Samsonovich and Chaim ben Shloima Levisham Gardner, right? Is that the correct? Gardner. Tonight is the Hilula, is the yartzeit of the Baal Hatanya. And what's that? They're not extremes. They're not extremes. The hours are extreme, and thank you to. Were they extremes?
No, it seems to be extreme.
Seems to be extreme. But for those who went to Ner Yisrael here and remember the Rosh Yeshiva Rabbi Friedler Zatzal, his Rebbe was, remember David? Rabbi Dessler.
Yeah.
So the yartzeit of is tonight. So a little bit about Rabbi Dessler. He was known as the Litvische Chassid. He obviously passed away today, so there's a connection to the Alter Rebbe. But just briefly, if you read in the bibliography of Michtav Eliyahu, you'll see that even though he learned in Kelm, which is the epicenter of Musar, a lot of his sources are from other places as well. And how his connection to Chabad was where his father lived, and that he went to Rostov where the Rebbe Rashab was, and he listened to a lot of Teres Chassidus. When he finally moved to England, the Gate said, he was a chavrusa with Reb Itchel. I don't know who this is. Itchel and Masmid. Is that Lubavitcher?
There's a big chassid. Yeah.
There's a big chassid.
Yeah.
So obviously there was a lot of influence there.
He started Hatanya at Rav Dessler.
Rav Dessler.
Yeah.
Right.
Some of his writings were based
correct.
on it. Yeah.
If you read his wordings, a lot of it echo what's written in Tanya. So just like today, we're figuring out those people who are big Litvish are not that Litvish. You can speak to Mintzberg, and those who are big Hasidim are actually quite Litvish too. So,
yeah. So
anyway.
one of the ideas, the yartzeit of the Baal Hatanya, his name was Shneur, two lights, because he wrote he was mechaber the Nigla and Chassidus. So in Nigla he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Rav, and then he wrote the Tanya amongst other Sfarim. So the Shnei Eretz, the idea was that when the teachings of the Teres Chabad, essentially teaching Teres Chassidus, was to show that it's not two Teres, it's not two extremes. It's one Torah. There's a neshama, there's a guf. It's the pnius Torah. It's the deeper dimension, essentially. We could talk. There's a lot of interesting things, a connection between Rav Dessler, but sort of want to touch on one idea to show how the interconnectedness of many different ideas. And this it bases itself in the beginning of the parsha here when it talks about the Yamas Yosef that generation essentially dies out, and then the pasuk starts by Yaakov Melech Chadash al Mitzrayim al Sher Lo Yadas Yosef. So the whole transition happens when there's this new king that rises by Yaakov, and this person didn't know Yosef. So the Gemara in Eruvin says that there's a debate. Rav and Shmuel, was it Bayakim Melech Chadash? Was it? So the Gemara doesn't say clearly who says what. It says one opinion says Chadash Mamish. One says it was the same one. He made new decrees, but it's brought down in various forums. Radvaz says that the Rambam had the hedges in the Rambam. He has the opinion that when there's two opinions, Maram are like this and Chadam are like this. So the first one would go based on the order. So the Rav and Shmuel, the first opinion Chadash Mamash would be Rav, and the second one would be Shmuel. And each one has a reason why they're not just going to argue. Rav says Chadash, it says Vayakom El Chadash, so it's a new king. The other opinion says no, but it doesn't say Vayamas Vayimlech that someone died. It says Vayakom, so he got up. So if the Torah was trying to intimate that there was a death and it's a new king, why say Vayakom El Chadash? So Elamai, but it says Ashal Yodas Yosef. So the Rav has something going for him because it makes sense. Chadash Mamash means that he didn't know Yosef. So he says he made himself as if he didn't know. Okay, that's the Gemara. Rashi brings that here.
What it's saying in Yiddish when you don't make like you don't know
yeah. Some people have that art. Now, so the Rashi over here,
and every wife, even more so.
Vayakom Melech Chadash says Rashi. Rabbi Shmuel Chad Amar Chadash Mamash Chad Amar Shin Schad Shitzeres Shaliyadas Yosef also says Atzmi Kuliyada. So Rashi brings it. Now there's a premise we know. This is in Rashi that there's a certain way to learn Rashi. We know read Rashi throughout the Torah. Everything is based on Midrashim Gemara, but rarely does he actually bring the Baal Memra or a Mucker, right? Some say it's about a little over 100, 130 times he'll bring a name of an opinion or reference a citation, a Mucker where it came from. So I mean, generally speaking, Rashi doesn't find it necessary or relevant to know who said the Medrash. You open up a typical Rashi, he gives the pshat. So if he does say it, there must be a reason. And this is even more clear, obvious when we look in the context of the Rashi versus the Gemara. So the Gemara in Eruvin actually brings several machlokes. Over there, it's a Gemara in Eruvin, Daf Mem Gimel, and it's also brought in Gemara Site as well, and in the Medrash. So the Gemara brings several debates between Rav and Shmuel. So one of them, for example, we go back to the parsha of Vayeshev. So over there, it says Yosef and the Eshes Paitifar, V'yavi Bais Medrash, right? So one opinion says Malachta, he wants to do Malachta, it's Malachta Mamash. He actually was there, he was working in the house, he did that. And the second opinion is Lasis Tzrachav, right? He was about to submit. And but the Musyoike Nirlai, there was so there he actually, so that Gemara is in Saita. So over there it's also Rav and Shmuel. They have this debate, and Rashi brings it in the parsha of the two opinions. In another place, Rashi brings this as well. We see this debate between Rav and Shmuel is in the parsha of Vayera, where it says Avram Avinu Vayita Eshel Versheva. He's planting an Eshel. What's an Eshel? Again, Rav and Shmuel. One opinion says Eshel is Pardus. It's he planted an orchard. One opinion says it's a pundak. He made a hotel. Okay, so this we see Rashi several places where he brings the name of Rav and Shmuel in the debate. But it's interesting, you look in other places where Rashi, he quotes the two interpretations, but he doesn't mention the name. So one example is in the parsha of Chayesara, when Avram wants to buy the Maris Machpelah. So over there, Rashi says, what's Machpelah? He brings two interpretations. One, the Bais Valia Gaba was a two-story. That's why it's called Machpelah, because there's two stories. Another opinion is no, it was Bais Lifnim. Bais was two rooms, but it was Kfeil Bezugis. There were a bunch of pairs, right? This is a debate between Rav and Shmuel. You look in the Gemara in Eruvin, it mentions this debate, this machlekes, but Rashi only brings the two opinions. He doesn't say the name, doesn't say the Baal HaMemra. Again, we find this earlier in the parsha of Lech Lecha and Noach, where there's a debate there's Nimrod and there's Amrachel, right? The question is, who's the real name? Because there's interchangeable. It says that the Yalad is Nimrod. So Rashi says, what's Nimrod? That so in the Gemara, there's a machlokes. One opinion says his name is Nimrod. Why is he called Amrachel? Because Hippel he threw Avram into the kibshon, into the furnace. Another opinion says no, his real name is Amrachel. Why is he called Nimrod? Shehimrid, he caused the world, the people to rebel and to have a mutiny against Hashem. Again, this is in the Gemara. Eruvin, it brings a bunch of machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. But Rashi in these two places, in Chayesara and in the context of Nimrod and Amrachel, he quotes the debate. He brings the two opinions, but he doesn't say the Baal HaMemra. So it's very clear that Rashi, when he does bring the name, there's a purpose. Not only that, in the machlekes in Gemara and Saita about
he argues the other way. When he doesn't bring the name, it's a purpose.
No, but generally he doesn't bring the name. Throughout Kol HaTorah Kula, almost generally he doesn't bring a name. right? If you take all the Rashis from Chamisha,
why wouldn't you bring it in?
so the way that the Rebbe had a derech in Rashi Pshutish Mikra, and there's a bunch of klalim. Essentially, it's based on the beginning of Rashi when he says, "Ani lo yibasi el farsh Pshutish Mikra." I'm here to explain Pshutish Mikra. So I'm going to feed you the information that you need to know to understand. It's all what's important to understand is what the pshat is. Who cares what your source is, right? So for a 5-year-old, over there, every time you read a pasuk, I need to know if there's something that's difficult, that's not understood. You'll bring a pshat. But who cares who said it, right? The only reason he will bring, and that's the overwhelming majority, over 90.
Not concerned with maybe he's not worried about that.
He's right. So over here, generally, the question is, if you read through the Kala Terakula with all the Rashis, what percentage would you say he brings the mucker, and how many times does he bring the Baal Memra? How many times? I just gave you two examples, not just from the same Gemara, from the same Baal members, where a couple times he does bring it, a couple times he doesn't bring it. So the approach is essentially that the default position is he doesn't bring, because yes, it's a good question about Davar B'Shem Ma'im, right? But we in terms of speaking to a kid who's been Chamash L'Mikra, you don't want to overwhelm him with information. You want to give him what is relevant to know at this time. This time is that okay. It's something. It's a good question, but that's in the general in the Kol Rashi. So and now what's even more fascinating is that in the Gemara in Saita, I believe it's Daf Yud Aleph, when it has the machlokes about Eshel, right? Over there, it's not even Rav and Shmuel. The Maskil David asks on Rashi in the parsha of Vayera, Rashi says, Rav and Shmuel, is it a pundik, is it a pardes? And he says, I don't know what he's talking about, Rav and Shmuel, the Gemara, or Yehuda Zarchi. And he says the same thing as in the Medrash Rabbit, the same thing. I don't know where we got Rav and Shmuel. Apparently, Rashi must have found like Yersa in the Gemara or in the Medrash that had Rav and Shmuel. So Rashi asked specifically in that case, chose that. Why? The approach is that through knowing their names, that will actually lend insight and understanding the context of it. In other words, based on the approach that generally we don't give a name. The name is only when it'll lend extra hasbara, extra comprehension, understanding in what's difficult to explain in the pasuk. So now there are a few approaches that are brought in this, and the basic premise, and this ties into what I was saying before about Torah Achas, is that we know that many times we learn throughout the Gemara. There's thousands and thousands of machlokes, and some people actually debate many times. Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. We find many machlokes. Rabbi and Rava, right? Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia, and Rabbi Yosef, on and on. Rabbi Yechon, Reish Lakish. There is often we could look at each machlokes as an independent, isolated thing, self-contained. They argued over here, they argued in Uktzin, they argued in the Nezikin, in Moyed, etc., etc. But another approach is to see that somehow, if we actually drill deeper, they weren't just arguing in random places. There's an underlying concept, a theme that sort of threads and pervades through the different arguments. Gemara oftentimes uses the term l'taimei, right? Rabbi Yehuda l'taimei, Rabbi Meir l'taimei. But in the more yeshivish term, it's like the l'shitase, which was adopted by various people in the later generations. Most famously, you had Rabbi Yosef Engel in his Sfarim, Asvan Deraisa, Lekach Toiv, Bais Medrash, which he sort of has that. The Rogachover and Safnas Paneach did a lot. You find it many times in the Rebbe's Torah. This concept of l'shitase, which essentially says is what they're really debating was about a very, very deep fundamental idea, which had applications in many different areas, and based on that, explaining. So the Rebbe brings from the Shem Olam, Rabbi Reuven Margolius, who wrote a sefer Shem Olam amongst many Sfarim, and he's based on the Gemara, and he basically makes the distinction between Rav and Shmuel, that Rav is essentially interprets the meaning of the word. We focus on it. It says Chadash means Chadash Mamash. Shmuel says, hang on, you can't just look at the word, you have to look at the context. And the context, the Teuchen, okay, it's not a very PC thing. Okay, fine. But the Rebbe, and we'll show it in a few other places. But it's not good to explain Rashi because, but I don't want. We're going to go in a different mahalach, the mahalach that the Rebbe brings, and that is like this. We find there's the Gemara in Bechoros. Gemara in Bechoros, I believe, is Daf Memtes. He says that generally speaking, the Hilchasa Karav Isuri and Shmuel Bedini. So the halacha is, generally speaking, follows Rav in matters of Isra Beheter, and when they get to Dinim, which is Dinim Maminis, it's like Shmuel. And the Rosh says in Baba Kama, he says why? He says because the Rav, he was very much focused. He got a lot of questions in Isra Beheter, And therefore, he was medayik. He really drilled deep to understand the dynamics, and therefore he was very proficient. He was baki in it, and Shmuel in the terms of dinim, and therefore they had the samchus. Generally speaking, of course, Shmuel obviously knew Isser V'Heter, and Rav knew Mamonis. And sometimes the Gemara will say the halacha is looking bar mahani plus. Sometimes it's not always the case, but generally speaking, the halacha follows Rav in Isser V'Heter and Shmuel in Mamonis. Now, if you want to look, what's essentially the difference between Isser and Mammon? It's Isser is essentially bin Adam Lamakim. It's between us and Hashem. And Mammonis is obviously there's an element of Makim, but it's essentially bin Adam Lachaver. That is essentially. And therefore, generally speaking, when we say, why did Rav and Shmuel argue? Okay, so he could learn like this, Chadash Mammoth. This is Chadash is of course, each one has their opinion to go back and forth. But how good for Kasha? Why did you learn that way? And that's what essentially the Shittase does. And what really the concept of getting down to the essence of everything. Every person, of course, everyone studies each idea independently and tries to understand what's going on. But ultimately, we could say that if you really get to the core of the person, they would naturally, when you could look at something from two perspectives, something that they were familiar with and something they were bucking in, automatically they would see it through a lens. It's not
always look at something as a lawyer.
No.
You're always going to look at something as a Rav.
So we're not saying that they had a bias. But this concept, bottom line, Hillel and Shammai, right? Who explains in Chassidus that you have the idea that Hillel, oftentimes you'll see a pervading idea. He's always more makel, right? And Shammai, because his Shammai came from Chesed and the Shammai came from Gvura, but it's not pshat that it was that Chas v'Shalom, that the Torah was essentially a personal disposition. But in Seichel itself, because Torah is supposed to be understood in our Seichels, naturally you look through something through a certain lens. That is the case. Let us look at these few machlokes, because specifically in these, where Rashi mentions the name Rav and Shmuel, because essentially there's a question. Question is, what's the whole discussion of here? The Torah is essentially trying to tell us that Yosef dies, and now as things go on, things get very bad, and then there's a whole gullus. There's a fundamental question. What's the Torah trying to tell us? Because really there's a question. The question that's bothering us is, how is it possible that Paro goes all of a sudden, after all what Yosef did and all the good things he did for Mitzrayim, and he saved his empire and he does everything, all of a sudden he stands up and that's it. He turns a whole different page and things go in another direction. It's hard to understand. So you're going to say, hang on a second. Well, maybe he didn't know what was going on, but at the end of the day, read what he says. He says, classic anti-Semitism. There's a bunch of ifs. Maybe they're starting to multiply. There's so many of them. Might be a war. They might join, right? So the question is that a real rational thing? Look what happened. The Yidden have been living there for a long time. They never did anything. And in fact, that so much was done for them. They were given food and they had a place in Goshen to live. Naturally, a person should be a makir toif. And the Yidden to this point never exhibited any signs of that they would be rebellious and ungrateful. So the question is, what exactly prompted, from a rational, logical perspective? You can't say that Pari had a legitimate fear. The only thing you could really say is, the Rabbi says, look at the precedent of Avram. When Avimelech did something good, he says, Tishba for the good that you did, he promised for generations that they would have a treaty. So where exactly did Pari have this idea? Maybe, so you must say, there was a rishus. He was a Russia, because from a rational, logical perspective, there's no justifiable reason why he would do this slavery to the Yidden. Elamai, he's a Russia. But the question is, what kind of Russia? You could see, was his rishus? Did it express itself? And in other words, was it a moral evil? Or was it just in terms between him and Hashem? In other words, there was something
disguising what he really is.
No, there's rishus. No. So the pen here is trying to give a pretext and a context, right, for justify it. But obviously, we know that's not true. So Elamai, he's a Russia. And that's why he hates the Jews. And the question is, that act that he decided to all of a sudden enact these new decrees and all of that, where did it come from? Was it a bin Adam Lam? It was a rishus, but what kind of rishus? That's the debate between Rav and Shmuel, because Rav is going to see things through the prism of bin Adam Makim, because the Yisurim, and Shmuel is going to see bin Adam Lachaver. So what's the difference if I say that your rishus is bin Adam Lachaver or bin Adam Makim? So let's look at bin Adam Lamakim. Where is there a bigger rishus? If you're a new king or you're an old king? So here's the thing. Let's say what's the other ben Adam Lachaver. That's very easy to understand. If it's an old king, if it's a new king, you could say, hang on, I didn't know anything, right? What do you want from me? So he must have heard something, but at least he could justifiably say, I'm a new king. Yosef never did anything for me, and therefore I could say I could wash my hands clean. But if it was an old king, right? So here I'm going to say he did good for you. He did all those good things, those amazing things. How can you be such a kafui type, right? But if you look at it being adam lamakim, it's a whole different perspective. It's the opposite way around, because bein adam lamakim is essentially, we're not looking so much at the interpersonal relationship. The question is, do you have a rationalization in terms of your relationship with Hashem? That is to say, if you're the old king, you could say like this: the Yidden came. I'm the same pari that was. I'm not a new guy. So when you guys came down, you came down to Mitzrayim. We gave you food. We took care of you. In fact, so you assumed that I would be your king. You look at when Yaakov in parsha Vayigash, he gave covet Russia. He gave covet to the pari when he came in. He gave him a bracha, and when he left, when he departed, so he gave covet. So you guys submitted to me. So now you're under my rulership. I therefore, since you submitted to me, I have the ability, at least in a masla, I could do whatever I want because you submitted yourself to my mulcha. But if it's a new king, then you could say no. You can't justify them because you came along. They never submitted to you. They were here while you before you became a king. Now you're coming along and changing all your stuff. Klapi shmai. Yes, of course, Ben Adam Lachaveri could say I didn't know who these people are. But at the end of the day, who gave you the right to come along and say you're going to make new decrees? The previous king never did it, so why are you doing it? So this is at least two perspectives that can inform why would one person say chadash mamash. One person would say, so Rav right away looks through Ben Adam Lakim. He says, at the end of the day, what's the real rishus? Chadash, because he never had permission. He had never submitted themselves to his monarchy, to his rulership, and therefore that's the real rishus. Shmuel says no. It's the same old king, but if so, and therefore he's taka Russia because you're the same guy. I look at Ben Adam Lachaveri. It was Yosef did all the good. How could you repay good with evil? Now let's go to the other machlokes, and we have the debate. First, we'll talk about the malachtoi. Yosef is vayave ba'isa lasses malachtoi. Clearly, the Torah is trying to bring out the tzidkus, the righteousness of Yosef. Now, Yosef, because there's all these trumped up charges, he gets thrown into jail. So if you want to look at his tzidkus, his righteousness, you can look at through the prism of Ben Adam Lamakim, or you can look at it Ben Adam Lachaveri. If you look at it between Ben Adam Lamakim, at the end of the day, what's the main thing? You're trying to bring out that he was totally righteous, didn't do anything immoral. So therefore, what did he come to do? Malachte mamash. That's that he came through. He didn't have any other ideas because he was a tzaddik. He was clean throughout. So that would be essentially the pashta pshat. But if you look at Ben Adam Lachaveri, it's a little bit different because here the question that preoccupies is not so much the moral. How moral was Yosef? The question is, did he do his job as an employee? Right. So it says, when did Yosef come? Only when ein ish asher me'anshei bayis. There's no one there. In other words, it was an off day. Right. So he wasn't derelict in any way of his duties towards his master. So therefore, for essentially what the Torah is trying to highlight, is that the last is tzrachav, because over there, true, it wasn't such a great thing. But at the end of the day, last tzrachav, he only did it in a time when the master wasn't around. So that's another angle. Obviously, in the end, as Gemara says, most yokinai, so that also, but at least that shows why the Torah is sort of framing it in that way. And then finally, we have there's the debate of the Eshal.
So he's not. You're saying last struggle means that he was chas v'shalom going to sin with Eshes Potiphar, but not an accompanied tie. So
in other words, he always was there. In other words, he would never take away from Ben Adam Lachaveri. Exactly. He would never be neglecting his duties. Yeah.
He was more concerned about his duties than his duties to Hashem.
Not more. The question over here is essentially, what is the Torah when the Torah says Vayavi Abais last night? The ain't ish me'anshei Abais. In the Shem Olam, Rabbi Goliath, he says, because Rav says Moachtoi literally means Moachtoi Mamsh. Shmuel looks at the Teichen. Why does the Torah say the ain't ish asher me'anshei Abais? Right? The Torah is trying to say something. Why is it relevant that there's nobody there? right? Because obviously,
No, it was relevant because he was going to sin.
right?
That's
No,
was
in a Hanami, he would only do that. He would only go ahead doing something when there's nobody home. He wouldn't. It's something that wouldn't be done when yesh ishmean she'abayis, right? So that's the context. But through the prism of ben adam lachavera, it's understood because we're saying is what's preoccupying Yosef this time is not his ben adam and how he's going to do something immoral. The question is he whole with his master essentially?
You say that Shmuel wanted to say Lasis Tzrochai, because if Yosef Tzaddik was such a tzaddik in the sense that he was never going to sin, then why would he come into a house with a woman when there's nobody around? A tzaddik would never put himself into such a situation. He's outside. Elamai, the only reason why he went is because his Yetzirah was miskaber. That's why Shmuel said that.
Correct, but it seems from the general narrative, the Torah is empathizing with Yosef and saying, at the end of the day, he came to the house of Enish Mount Shebayis and he was thrown into jail. The general narrative seems to say that the Torah is trying to say that Yosef, what he did wasn't the worst thing, because in other words, there's no indictment in that story. From the way the narrative reads, it's like Shabbat gets thrown into jail. So you can almost lend, in other words, so why is the Torah saying that Yosef comes out clean in the story? Seemingly, they have lasses malachtoi, lasses tzracha. So if
he did, that's why he was clean. But the question is, why would he? She was coming on to him for months before. He was resisting. He knows there's nobody in the house. Why would he go into a house when he has a yichud with this woman? He would never do that.
Sure. No, so he talked. So lasses tzracha means that was his intent. But the question is, could we?
That's what Shmuel is struggling with.
He struggles with that. But in other words, why does he see lasses tzracha as why can't you just say malachtei mamash? In other words, he's changing it from the literal meaning. Malachtoi means malachtoi. He was working every day, right? Why did it change? Because the Ein Ish Man Shebayis, that sort of that switches it up.
What's pushing Shmuel to change from Rab's pshat? That's the question.
In other words, the path of least resistance is malachtei mamash.
Yeah,
that's why I'm saying why what's he struggling with? Why? Because a tzaddik would never go into a house.
That's doing his work.
No, but it's very clear. It says Ein Ish Man Shebayis, right? The Torah is saying, hello, there was nobody home. Well, why is that piece relevant? That informs us. Yeah. Okay. But the question is,
he thought that she wasn't home?
No, in Ish Me'an Shebayis. He knew she was there.
So how is that Ben Adam Chavera?
He wasn't supposed to work. He didn't derelict his working.
Because he has good work ethic?
Good work.
What about Ben Adam to her in Baal? The husband.
Okay, so okay, fine. So I want to just finish up because I think we are almost
We're okay. We're
yeah, because he said 10:30 and they didn't want to. Okay, yeah. So essentially, in that context, you have a good question, but perhaps in other words, the issue of lasses tzracha could be seen either as a moral problem, right, or it could be seen as, in other words, in that society, it was these kind of relations weren't, but they didn't look at it the way we look at it. Right? Perhaps you could say the concept of morality was more of a religious convention than in the Egyptian culture, which was shtufei zima, wasn't seen the same way.
It's a good answer, but the mice took him later to say that was
They threw him in jail.
Right? They threw him in jail because of this. What you do for me? Right in my house.
Right.
Yeah. So he fails in his mind. He failed ben adam lachavera.
Yeah.
That's the point. So he messed up ben adam lachavera. That's what Potiphar is telling him.
Okay, so let's maybe we'll circle back. I just wanted to do the last one over there is Eshel. So Eshel over here, so you have two opinions, Rav and Shmuel. The one says it's a pardes. One says it's a hotel, pundak. So the question is like this. So obviously, again, you have if you look through the pshat and the toichen. So literally, what is Eshel? Eshel is a tree. Rashi has to say a pundak. He says matziu lashin netia ba'olim. Rashi has to find, because it says vayita Eshel. How could you say vayita pundak? Right? So you find he brings a pasuk somewhere.
How to do that?
So we have, but so taking that, so that's why for Shmuel, because the question is like this: what's he trying to accomplish there? He has a kiruv center, right? Vayikra Hashem b'shem Hashem ke'elolam. So the question is, Eshel taka literally means a pardes, but the question is the toichen. What's Avram really trying to accomplish? To promote the Torah mitzvahs. What's a better chance if you plant a tree, or if you have a center with shiurim, shabbatons, and programs? That's a lot better. But here we can also see the difference between ben adam lachaver and ben adam lamakim. So if you look at ben adam lachaver, So over there, obviously, as well, you would say that the pundak, the hotel, you have people coming. You could really promote the interpersonal relationships. But if you want to look at ben adam lamakim, what is essentially here? You're doing something for Hashem, right? You're basically the person's developing the relationship. That's like the kira. So where is it more pronounced? So you could say that when a person has to build it, has to plant, and then there's all kinds of things that they do. Like Cain, he brought his own, whenever he made something, he brought the carbon la Hashem. Here, it's to give meiser, to do things in the planting, in the avodah that you do in the pardes. You could see more a person developing the relationship with Hashem, you could say, than the hotel. So ultimately, these are some of the differences that Rashi brings between Rav and Shmuel. In the other cases, he doesn't mention. And there's a few other examples. I'm not, it's because it's a part of a longer talk. But just trying to bring out this idea that you could have different machlokes between different people, and when they each had a certain perspective, that informs through all of that, consistent. And just to turn off with in the end, when the Rabbi gives this idea that there's no just stama academic exercise. What's the Musar Haskell that you have? Ultimately, what Rashi is telling us is sometimes there's these new people, Yakam El Chadash, and people are always looking. Oh, there's these leaders. We say, oh, the old guy's no good. We want to bring in there's going to be elections. We're going to something new and shiny. And then sometimes it's the old guy who says he's better because he makes this promise and that promise. Ultimately, it doesn't make a difference who's in charge. Chadash mamash, a new agenda, an old agenda. At the end of the day, the Pare, what he was trying to accomplish was, he said, throw them into the Nile, the Ur, which we know the Ur, that was a sort essentially the Egyptian culture. To throw the Scharim in, Afastachayan essentially was to immerse them in the culture of Mitzrayim. But who fought back was the Miyaldis. So they said it was the civil disobedience, right? They said, we're not taking this. And how do you confront Pari? It says Moshe comes with Mata Elikim, right? Because when we deal with the nations of the world, and it's something that I think it's very relevant to now, because some people think, oh, there's the Pari, and how do we confront him? How do we deal with him? We have to be diplomatic. We have, with all the nations and whatnot. You have to come with Mata Elikim. Moshe, on the one hand, we see later in parsha of Shmois and Be'era, Rashi says he gave covet to Pari, right? We have to have respect. We have to do diplomacy. We have to get our weapons. We have to do our things. But ultimately, we have to have the Jewish pride. The Mata Elikim signifies that we're not apologetic. We come to Pari, and what did he say? He says, Shalach Sa'ami, right? V'Abduni. Most people say, oh, because they said, let my people go. That was the hallmark of that was the mantra of all the things. But the Rebbe says, you're missing out. What's the main thing? It wasn't just Shalach Kasami, let my people go. It's the Abduni. The whole purpose of the thing, it's not just to be free, it's to serve Hashem. So to come to Pari and say, this is our land, this is our Torah mitzvahs, to have that pride and not be apologetic, not be ashamed, not to be meek, and to be able to say, the Abduni, that we everything that we have is because we're sent by Hashem. That's the main thing. And this all ties together with the Shnei Iris, that we all have different perspectives. We're all speaking the same language, to be able to see that perspective, and through that, yeah.
You know what the real wish, the sort of snare comes from. There was a couple who had a baby.
Yes, Uri and Meir. Uri and Meir was the
I
compromise.
heard the story of Mayor.
No, it was Uri and Meir. There were two grandparents.
Two
So
grandfathers, they were fighting.
They were fighting what should be the name. So they said Shnei, that's how they made the compromise. So yeah, the Yisoid of Shnei was Pshara. Was a Pshara.
That's a true one.
Goya.
Yeah. So when you read Rav and Shmuel, so every machlokes they have is.
So there's the Rebbe brings a few other places, and some people have taken this idea and try to apply it to other machlokes. It says Hoidu and Kush right over there. There's
either next door to one another,
or was that. So also there's
nothing wrong. On Hanukkah, I discussed the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Shammai, Koach and Poel. Right. What would you look at something in its potential energy? There's nothing wrong with an argument just for the sake of argument too.
That's the Jewish way. But if you read some of
That's our way.
Thank you.
In our way, yes.
What do you mean? The Gemara is no, I know.
There's always a reason why they're arguing. As far as I'm
it's more geschmack. What?
Make a l'chaim.
So we're taking it away. You're speaking and we're eating.